The wine was decent, a Cabernet that tasted more like oak than fruit, but it wasn't bad enough to complain about. Across from me, Lynn was mid-laugh, her fingers brushing the stem of her glass. She had one of those easy, unguarded laughs, the kind that made me forget, for a moment, that I was a man in his 50s who still hesitated before saying, "I'm divorced." Then my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it. Lynn was telling a story about her students. She taught high school history, and I was nodding along, enjoying the way her hands moved when she talked. But the buzz came again, insistent, vibrating against the linen tablecloth. I glanced down, expecting my daughter checking in, or maybe my brother sending another meme I wouldn't understand. But the name on the screen wasn't just unexpected, it was a jolt. Karen, my ex-wife. We hadn't spoken in 8 months, not since the day we signed the papers, when she handed me back the spare key to the house with a quiet, "You should take this." No fights, no last-minute pleas, just two people who had run out of ways to try. After 23 years, that was it. And now, here she was, calling me at 7:42 p.m. on a Thursday while I sat in a dimly lit Italian restaurant with a woman who didn't know her name. The phone kept buzzing. Lynn's story trailed off. "You should get that," she said, nodding toward my pocket. I shook my head. "It can wait." But my thumb hovered over the screen, caught between habit and something sharper. Why now? Karen wasn't the type to call without reason. A year ago I would have known instantly. If our daughter was hurt, if the house was on fire, if the dog was sick. But now, I had no right to know, no right to worry. I silenced the call and set the phone face down. Lynn arched an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I lied. "Just someone I'll call back later." She smiled, but I could tell she noticed the way my shoulders had tensed. I took a sip of wine, trying to wash down the sudden tightness in my throat. The restaurant noise rushed back in, clinking silverware, the low hum of conversations, a waiter laughing near the kitchen. Normal sounds, life moving forward. But all I could think about was the phone in my lap. Silent now, heavy with whatever Karen hadn't said. The call from Karen lingered in the back of my mind like a stubborn ghost, but I forced myself to focus on Lynn. She was easy to talk to, sharp, with a dry sense of humor that didn't feel rehearsed. Still, every time I laughed, part of me pulled back, like I was betraying something. I excused myself to the restroom, more to check my phone than anything else. The screen showed no missed calls, no voicemail, just Karen's name, bold and unresolved in my recent calls list. Standing at the sink, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at myself in the mirror. The man looking back was older than I expected, gray creeping into my stubble, lines around my eyes that hadn't been there a few years ago. The kind of face that had stopped surprising me in the mornings, but still felt unfamiliar in moments like this. I thought about the last time I'd seen Karen. It was in our lawyer's office, late winter, the heat cranked up too high. She wore that navy sweater I'd always liked, the one that brought out the blue in her eyes. We didn't fight. We didn't even talk much. Just signed where we were told to sign, nodded when the lawyer explained things we already knew. The silence between us had started long before that day. It began with small things, me working late, her going to bed early. Then the gaps grew wider. Conversations became logistics. "Did you pay the electric bill? What time's the plumber coming?" One night, over meatloaf she'd made from her mother's recipe, Karen said, "I think we should talk about us." I knew what that meant. I'd known for months, maybe years, but hearing it out loud felt like stepping into cold water. We tried counseling, 2 sessions. The therapist asked what we wanted from each other, and I remember staring at my hands, unable to answer. Karen cried, not the loud, messy kind, but quiet, like she was trying not to inconvenience anyone. That was the worst part. The divorce wasn't dramatic. No screaming matches, no broken dishes, just 2 people who'd run out of road. The restaurant bathroom door creaked open, pulling me back. Some guy in a suit gave me a nod as he passed. I dried my hands, took a breath, and walked out. Lynn was scrolling through her phone when I got back to the table. She looked up and smiled. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Just needed a minute." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her skin was warm. "First dates are weird, right?" I laughed, but my chest ached. Because this wasn't just a first date. It was the first time in decades I'd sat across from a woman who didn't know my history, who didn't know Karen. I glanced at my phone again, still silent on the table. Whatever Karen wanted, it could wait. For now. Lynn ordered tiramisu for us to share, and when it arrived, she immediately scooped up a bite with her fork. "You have to try this," she said, holding it out to me. There was a streak of cocoa powder on her thumb. I hesitated just half a second too long before leaning forward to take the bite. The intimacy of the gesture felt strangely dangerous, like testing weight on thin ice. The dessert was good, creamy with just the right bitterness from the espresso. But what I noticed more was how natural this all felt, how easily I could imagine doing this again. That thought scared me more than it should have. We'd met through mutual friends at a backyard barbecue 3 weeks earlier. Lynn had been grilling the host about the historical accuracy of some World War II movie, and I'd jumped in with a fact I remembered from a documentary. The conversation had flowed easily from there. When she'd texted me a few days later suggesting dinner, I'd surprised myself by saying yes immediately. Now, watching her lick mascarpone from her fork, I realized this was the first time since my divorce that I'd actually been present with someone, not just going through the motions, but genuinely enjoying a woman's company. "You're quiet," Lynn said, nudging my foot under the table. "Regretting your life choices yet?" "Not even close," I said, and meant it. She told me about her first year teaching, how she'd nearly quit after a particularly disastrous parent-teacher conference. I shared stories from my engineering days, the kind of work anecdotes I hadn't told anyone in years because Karen had heard them all before. Lynn laughed in all the right places, asked follow-up questions. It was nice. Then my phone buzzed again. This time it was just a text notification, but I knew without looking who it was. The vibration seemed louder than it should have been, like the whole restaurant could hear it. Lynn politely looked away as I glanced at the screen. "Everything okay?" she asked when I didn't immediately put the phone away. I hesitated. There was a version of this where I told the truth, that my ex-wife was texting me during our first date, that I had no idea why, that part of me was already mentally back in that lawyer's office signing papers. But Lynn's face was open and kind in the candlelight, and I didn't want to bring my past into this new, uncomplicated space. "Just my daughter checking in," I lied. "She's at a friend's tonight." Lynn smiled. "That's sweet. How old is she?" 19, just finished her freshman year at State. Talking about Emily steadied me. This at least was familiar ground, the pride in my voice when I mentioned her grades, the way I could recite her schedule from memory. As Lynn asked more about Emily, I realized with a pang that Karen wasn't in any of these stories anymore. The woman who'd been at every parent-teacher conference, every soccer game, every late-night study session, she'd been edited out, reduced to a name on a phone screen. The tiramisu was nearly gone now. Lynn signaled for the check, and when it came, we had that awkward moment where neither of us was sure who should reach for it. I won, barely, and as I handed my card to the waiter, my phone buzzed once more in my pocket. This time I didn't check it. The walk to our cars was quiet, the kind of comfortable silence that usually only comes after years of knowing someone, not hours. Lynn's shoulder brushed against mine as we crossed the parking lot, and for a moment, I let myself imagine what it might be like to kiss her goodnight. Then my phone buzzed again. This time I couldn't ignore it. "Give me 1 second," I said, pulling it out as Lynn dug for her keys. The text was brief. "Can you call me when you get a chance? It's about Baxter." Baxter. Our 12-year-old golden retriever. The one who used to sleep at the foot of our bed, who Karen had taken in the divorce because my apartment didn't allow pets. My stomach dropped. "Everything okay?" Lynn asked. I hesitated. My dog might be sick. It felt strange to say my dog. He hadn't been mine in nearly a year. Lynn's face softened. "Oh no, do you need to call?" I should have said no. Should have told her I'd handle it later, but something in Karen's text, the lack of details, the quiet urgency, made me nod. "Just give me 2 minutes." I stepped a few feet away, the night air suddenly cooler against my skin. Karen picked up on the second ring. "Hey," she said. Her voice was steady, but there was a tightness underneath. Sorry to bother you. Is Baxter okay? A pause. He's not great. The vet thinks it might be his heart. They're running tests, but she stopped, and in that silence, I heard everything she wasn't saying. Baxter was old. We'd known this was coming. I closed my eyes. What do you need? I just thought you'd want to know, and I didn't want to make the decision alone. If it comes to that, the weight of that, if settled between us. I could hear the hum of traffic in the background, the sound of her shifting the phone against her ear. For a second, it was like no time had passed at all. I'll call you tomorrow, I said finally. When I turned back, Lynn was leaning against her car, arms crossed against the chill. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Bad news? I shoved my hands in my pockets. Just something I need to figure out. She nodded like she understood. But how could she? I wasn't sure I did. The drive home was too quiet. Lynn had given me a quick hug goodbye, polite, careful, and said we should do this again. I'd agreed automatically, but we both knew the night had shifted. I turned the radio on, then off again. Baxter. I hadn't seen him since the day I'd moved out. Karen had sent photos occasionally at first, but I'd stopped asking. It hurt too much to see him lying on our couch in our backyard without me there. Now, the thought of him sick, maybe dying, twisted something deep in my chest. My apartment was dark when I walked in. I poured a whiskey, sat on the couch, and stared at my phone. Karen's contact photo still showed her smiling at Emily's high school graduation, her arm around our daughter. I hadn't changed it. I should call her back, should ask for details. What exactly the vet said, what the options were. But part of me was afraid of hearing the tremor in her voice, afraid of realizing that after all this time I still knew exactly what it meant when Karen breathed that way before speaking. The whiskey burned going down. I thought about texting Lynn, some casual joke to smooth over the abrupt end to our date. But what would I say? Sorry I got distracted by my ex-wife and our dying dog. Still on for next week? My phone lit up with a notification. For one stupid second, I hoped it was Karen. It was Emily. Dad, did Mom call you about Bax? I exhaled slowly. So she knew. That meant it was serious. Yeah, I typed back. We'll figure it out. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Finally, he still sleeps with your old t-shirt. Something cracked behind my ribs. I finished the whiskey in one swallow. Then I opened my messages with Karen. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Tell me when the vet calls tomorrow, I wrote. I stared at those words for a long time before hitting send. The apartment was too quiet, the couch too empty. Somewhere across town, our dog was sleeping, maybe for the last time, wrapped in the scent of a life that didn't exist anymore. Morning light cut through the blinds, striping the bed where I'd barely slept. My phone showed no new messages, not from Karen, not from Lynn, just a weather alert and a spam email. I made coffee too strong, the way I always did when Karen wasn't there to remind me to measure. The first bitter sip brought it all back. Baxter's labored breathing on the phone last night. The quiet understanding in Karen's voice that we might be losing the last living piece of what we'd built together. The mug trembled in my hand. I opened my laptop to distract myself, but the screen filled with photos from last year's vacation, just me and Emily at the beach. Karen had taken that picture. I'd cropped her out when I set it as my wallpaper, but now I noticed her shadow stretching across the sand beside us. The phone rang. Not Karen. The vet's office. Mr. Henderson? A woman's voice, professional and warm. We've got Baxter stabilized. It's congestive heart failure, but with medication he could have several good months left. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by guilt. Several months. Enough time for what? For me to visit? To say goodbye properly? Or just enough time for Karen to shoulder this alone a little longer? Thank you, I said automatically. Then, before I could stop myself, Can you tell Karen I'll call her later? Silence on the line. Then, gently, of course. I sat there long after we'd hung up, staring at the wedding band I still hadn't taken off my keychain, The truth settled over me like dust. This wasn't about Baxter. Not really. It was about the way grief finds you in quiet moments, in vets' offices and half-empty apartments, and first dates that should have been happy. It was about realizing that some loves don't end cleanly, even when the paperwork is signed. The caring about someone's pain doesn't stop just because you're no longer the one who gets to comfort them. I picked up my phone, not to call Karen, not yet, but to text Lynn. About last night, I owe you an explanation. Then I put the phone down, unfinished. Some truths need to be spoken aloud. The pharmacy receipt for Baxter's medication still sat on my passenger seat 3 days later when I pulled up to Karen's house. Her house now. The same brick ranch we'd bought when Emily was in kindergarten, though the flower beds were neater than I'd ever kept them. I hadn't called ahead. Baxter barked once when I knocked, the sound hoarse but familiar. Karen opened the door in yoga pants and an old college sweatshirt, her hair piled in a messy bun. For a second, we just stared at each other. "Hey," she said finally, stepping aside. Baxter wobbled over, tail thumping weakly against my leg. His muzzle was almost completely white now. I knelt, running my hands over his thinning fur, feeling the too quick flutter of his heartbeat. He licked my wrist once, like no time had passed. Karen leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. "He's been sleeping more," she said, "but he still barks at the mailman." I nodded, scratching behind Baxter's ears the way he always loved. The silence stretched, comfortable in a way that surprised me. "You didn't have to bring the meds," she said finally. "I know." We both watched Baxter settle at my feet with a grunt. The late afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, catching dust motes in the air between us. Karen exhaled sharply through her nose, a laugh without humor. "Remember when we first got him, that tiny apartment with the no pets policy? You cried when the super threatened to evict us. You bribed him with baseball tickets." We smiled at the memory, just for a second. Then the present rushed back in. I stood, brushing dog hair from my jeans. "I should go." Karen didn't argue. At the door, she hesitated. "Do you want to, I don't know, come by sometimes? For him?" Baxter whined at my feet. I looked down at our dog, then back at the woman who'd been my life for 23 years. Not everything needs to be resolved. Not every ending needs to be clean. "Yeah," I said. "I'd like that." The door clicked shut behind me. In my pocket, my phone buzzed. Lynn, finally responding. I got in the car and sat for a long moment, watching the curtains twitch in the living room window. Then I drove away slowly, the right way,